Russian general nicknamed the Butcher of Mariupol, has been dismissed. On September 24, 2022, the Russian Defense Ministry reported that Senior Lieutenant General Mikhail Mizintsev had been promoted to Deputy Defense Minister, replacing General Dmitry Bulgakov, who has held the post since 2010. Lieutenant General Mikhail Mizintsev has been appointed as Deputy Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, responsible for the logistics of the armed forces, the official statement from the Russian Defense Ministry said. In response, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry denounced Mizintsev's promotion, calling him a butcher and referring to his notorious roles in Russian campaigns in Syria and Mariupol. Spokesman of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine Brigadier General Alexei Hromov said. The Russian general called the butcher who killed the Syrians and the people of Mariupol has been promoted. Mikhail Mizintsev is currently Deputy Minister of Defense of Russia. The butcher will build a new slaughterhouse. Remember the face of this war criminal who will be convicted by the International Court. However, today, sources in Russia believe that Lieutenant General Mikhail Mizintsev has just been dismissed by Putin. Newsweek had an article titled "Putin Fires Butcher of Mariupol Russian General, Mikhail Mizintsev," which means, Putin fires Russian General, Mikhail Mizintsev, Mariupol butcher. According to a Russian war correspondent, the Russian commander dubbed the Butcher of Mariupol has been dismissed. Lieutenant General Mikhail Mizintsev was notorious for the horrific brutality of Russia's all-out invasion of Ukraine. He was particularly involved in the bombardment of the southern port city of Mariupol, which Moscow claimed in May 2022. Russian state media reported that Mizintsev was appointed Deputy Defense Minister in charge of logistics at the end of September 2022. The butcher will build a new slaughterhouse, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry commented on when reporting. IE is given. He has now been fired from his position, according to a Telegram post from Alexander Sladkov, a reporter for the state newspaper Izvestia. Mikhail Mizintsev had an interesting fate this year, Sladkov wrote on Thursday, describing the commander as a friend and seeking to argue that Mizintsev had no direct connection with the storming city, Mariupol. In a follow-up post, Sladkov said that Alexei Kuzmenkov, believed to be the deputy commander of the Russian National Guard, would replace Mizintsev in the role of Deputy Defense Minister in charge of logistics. Russian military blogger, Wargonzo, also posted on Telegram about Mizintsev's dismissal. Prior to taking up his role in the Ministry of Defense, Mizintsev was the head of the Defense Management Center since December 2014. On March 31, 2022, he was punished by the British government for his atrocities in Syria and Ukraine. Mizintsev is the director of the Defense Command and Control Center, where all Russian military activities are planned and controlled around the world, the British government said at the time. Mizintsev is known for using brutal tactics, including shelling civilian centers in both Aleppo in 2015 to 2016 and now in Mariupol, where atrocities are being carried out. To the people of Ukraine. Mizintsev was born in 1962, according to the Kremlin-backed TASS news agency, and graduated from the Kalinin-Suvorov Military School in 1980. As of April 2022, Mizintsev remained a little-known figure who was mostly hidden and confined to effective executive roles within the Russian military, The Washington Post reported. At that time, during the first months of the all-out war in Ukraine, the city of Mariupol, where Mizintsev was nicknamed the Butcher, suffered intense bombardment and fatal attacks such as on a house singing and a maternity hospital in the now invaded city. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry for comment via email. 2. Russia continues to suffer a lot of damage in the Kherson area, fighting broke out in 3 directions. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center on Thursday afternoon, April 27, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said that the Ukrainian self-defense forces had repelled 54 attacks by the invaders in the directions of Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka. In the last 24 hours, the Russian military carried out 7 missile strikes and 39 airstrikes, and fired multiple rocket launchers 61 times, specifically against the positions of Ukrainian forces and infrastructure. Important. In the direction of Bakhmut, the Russian army continued to conduct offensive actions. Fierce battles are taking place in the city of Bakhmut. The enemy carried out offensive actions at Orikhovo, Vasilivka and Ivanivsk but were unsuccessful. In the direction of Avdiivka, the Russian invaders made exploratory attacks and were quickly disrupted. In the past day, the Ukrainian Air Force has carried out 11 airstrikes on the concentration of Russian troops on the way to evacuate. 6 Russian drones were shot down. In addition, Ukrainian missile and artillery units hit 2 enemy air defense missile systems and 2 important military targets. Deputy Minister Hanna Maliar emphasized that the weather conditions had created many obstacles for the Russian troops on their way to retreat towards the city of Melitopol. Crawler armored vehicles can move, but wheeled vehicles are very difficult. In the past 24 hours, 510 Russian soldiers have been eliminated from the battle along with 2 tanks, 16 armored vehicles, 10 artillery systems, 3 multiple launch missile systems, 1 air defense system, and 13 troop transport vehicles. Overall, from February 24, 2022 to April 27, Russia lost about 188,920 troops in Ukraine. Total combat losses of the invaders also included 3,694 tanks, 7,178 armored vehicles, 2,887 artillery systems, 542 mass-launched missile systems, 293 air defense combat systems, 308 aircraft, 294 helicopters, 2,461 drones, 911 cruise missiles, 18 warships, 5,805 troop and fuel transport vehicles and 352 special equipment units. 3. Secretary-General NATO said almost all combat vehicles promised to be delivered to Ukraine. Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General of the Transatlantic Defense Alliance, said NATO allies had delivered nearly all of the combat vehicles promised to Ukraine. More than 98% of the combat vehicles promised to Ukraine have been delivered, Stoltenberg said at a news conference, adding that Kyiv now has the necessary military capabilities to retake the territory. He also welcomed Wednesday's phone call between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, their first since Russia invaded Ukraine, but said that hasn't changed the fact that China still does not condemn the Russian invasion. Following earlier comments by NATO's Jens Stoltenberg that nearly all of the combat vehicles promised had been delivered to Ukraine, AFP has details on how many were sent. In a press conference, Mr. Stoltenberg said the total includes 1,550 armored vehicles and 230 tanks. This equates to 9 new Ukrainian brigades. This will put Ukraine in a strong position to continue to recapture the invaded territory, the Secretary-General said. NATO members provided air defense and artillery systems while Poland and the Slovak Republic provided Soviet-built MiG-29s. Training has also been given to thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. Stoltenberg stressed this was unprecedented military assistance to Ukraine, but warned that we should never underestimate Russia. Moscow is mobilizing more army forces and is ready to send thousands of troops despite the very high casualty rate, he said, adding that NATO members need to stand firm. Mr. Stoltenberg said that a July NATO summit in Lithuania would lay out plans for a year-long program of assistance to Ukraine. 4. Top U.S. and Ukrainian generals talking on the phone. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, spoke with Ukraine's top military commander, Valery Zaluzhny, in a phone call, the government in Kyiv said in a statement on Thursday. The call also included U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the head of Ukraine's presidential office, Andriy Yermak. Yermak and Zaluzhny underlined the importance of our partners' continued active support of the Ukrainian army, including the provision of weapons and ammunition, the statement said. 5. Intelligence Bulletin of the UK Department of Defence Intelligence. In the latest intelligence report, published on the afternoon of April 27, the UK Department of Defence Intelligence said the following. The image shows that in March 2023, Russian forces established sandbag fighting positions on the roofs of some of the 6 reactor buildings at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia has controlled the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant since March 2022. However, this is the first indication that reactor buildings are in fact integrated in tactical defense planning. Russia may have built up these positions as it grew increasingly concerned about the prospect of a major Ukrainian attack. This change is very likely to increase the possibility of damage to the safety systems of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant if fighting breaks out around the plant. However, direct catastrophic damage to the reactors is unlikely in most reasonable situations involving infantry weapons because the fortified structures are so thoroughly protected. 6. The U.S. Department of Justice requested the detention of Private First Class Jack Teixeira because the suspect could still distribute documents if he was released on bail for questioning. Suspects who leaked Pentagon documents could still access classified information hidden somewhere, court documents said. The Associated Press reports that federal prosecutors are urging a judge to extend the detention of a Massachusetts Air National Guard soldier accused of leaking top-secret military documents, arguing that we could still have access to classified defense information, and then continue to spread it. In court filings filed late Wednesday, Justice Department lawyers said the release of 21-year-old Jack Teixeira while he awaits trial would pose a serious threat to U.S. national security. Investigators are still trying to determine if he still has any physical or digital copies of classified information, especially unpublished records. Simply no condition or combination of conditions can guarantee that the defendant will not disclose additional information that he knows or possesses, the prosecutors wrote. The damage defendant has caused to the national security of the United States is immeasurable. The damage the defendant is still capable of causing is extraordinary. The documents Teixeira allegedly leaked provide a wealth of top-secret information about allies and opponents, including details related to Ukraine's air defense systems. 7. Who is behind the drones found near Moscow? Russian media claim that Ukraine wants to take Putin's life with a drone. Newsweek ran an article titled, "Who's Behind the Drones Found Near Moscow?" which means, who's behind the drones found near Moscow? Russian state media have reported in recent days that 3 downed drones have been found near Moscow. Kremlin-backed news agencies say one of the drones, a Ukrainian-made UJ-22 airborne, was believed to have been armed with explosives when it was found Sunday in a forest about 19 miles from Moscow. A day later, TASS reported that law enforcement officials said they had found 2 more drones equipped with cameras near Moscow. The 3 alleged drone findings follow a report last month from Russian authorities about the presence of a drone about 9 miles northeast of Moscow that they suspect arrived from Ukraine. Ukraine has not claimed responsibility for any of these drones, and the drone's presence near the Russian capital has not been independently verified. However, these discoveries come as the head of the Crimean port city of Sevastopol, appointed by Moscow, has repeatedly made statements about Ukrainian drone strikes in the region of Ukraine. Grandfather. At the same time, speculation about an impending Ukrainian counterattack continued to grow. However, the fact that the drone reports have only come from Russian state media has led to some skepticism. Northwestern University political science professor William Reno told Newsweek he didn't put a lot of value on these reports because of the timing of the stories. It is too convenient to claim that Ukraine is conducting attacks deep into Russian territory at the exact moment when the latest leaked U.S. Department of Defense document describes how the Ukrainians want to attack deep into the territory. Russia, while American officials try to convince them not to do it. Reno said. The leak Reno mentioned released classified U.S. government documents on social media platforms. Some documents reveal that Ukrainian officials support attacks inside Russian territory. Despite a request from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the Biden administration did not provide Ukraine with a long-range missile system or advanced fighter aircraft. Part of the reason behind this reluctance is attributed to concerns about an escalation of the war if Ukraine uses the weapon to attack targets inside Russia. Guy McCardle, editor of the Special Operations Forces Report, or SOFREP, told Newsweek that he also doubts the Russian media reports. This seems like typical pure Russian propaganda. If Ukraine attacks Russia, they won't do it by launching weird drones here and there, he said. McCardle noted that the smaller, four-rotor drones mentioned in the stories can be purchased online or at hobby stores. Seeing a drone around a big city is like saying you see a car on the highway, he said. That doesn't mean it's full of explosives and on a mission to blow up the Kremlin. So far, the attacks in Russia that outside observers believe were carried out by Ukraine have all targeted deliberate military targets, retired U.S. Army Major John Spencer told CNN. Newsweek. It would be a huge disadvantage for the Ukrainians to attack Moscow and influence the Russian people to join the war in Ukraine, said Spencer, chair of urban war studies at the Madison Policy Forum. No. Spencer admits that, "This is war, it's hard to say who is behind what." But he said Ukraine is more likely to attack things like training centers or any kind of military target than the Kremlin. "They're not trying to kill Putin, that's for sure." Another possibility is that individuals or groups in Russia opposing the war in Ukraine may be behind the drones, Spencer said. Spencer is not alone in this view. Mark Katz, a professor at George Mason University's Schar School of Government and Policy, also said the drones could have come from Russia. Katz told Newsweek, "The Russian media wants the Russian public to be scared about Ukrainian drones whether or not these particular ones actually come from Ukraine. But there is another possibility other than that they are real Ukrainian drones or the story is untrue. The drones could be operated by internal Russian opposition groups, which this may or may not receive help from Ukraine." Katz added that Russian state media coverage of drones could backfire on them. "I realize that there is a danger to Moscow in exaggerating the story of drones, whether they are real or not. At some point the question will arise as to why the system Russia's defense systems let these operate in Russian airspace," he said. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Foreign Ministry by email for comment. 8. Russia's secret plans for the Baltic states leaked out. Newsweek had an article titled "Russia's Secret Plans for Baltic States Exposed," which means Russian secret plans for the Baltic states are exposed. An investigation has revealed that the Kremlin has drawn up a series of plans outlining how it can exert its influence in the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in the coming years. Leaked documents from Russian President Vladimir Putin's administration in Moscow were obtained by Swedish news agency Expressen, Yahoo News, and others. Before Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Baltic states had warned for years of a war that could be started by Russia. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov in January called Poland and the 3 Baltic states that are part of the European Union representatives with radical tendencies of Europe. The strategies were created by the Directorate for Transboundary Cooperation of the Russian presidential administration, which had previously drafted another document revealing that the Kremlin was planning to annex Belarus into a union state with Russia by 2030. According to Yahoo News, about 300,000 ethnic Russians live in Estonia, about 24% of the population. About 471,000 ethnic Russians live in Latvia, about 25% of the population, and Lithuania is home to about 140,000 people, or 5% of the population. The key issue for the Kremlin is to reduce the NATO military alliance's presence in the countries of the former Soviet Union, while also increasing Russian influence and culture, according to a joint investigation by Expressen, the Center for Lake London-based nuns, Kiev Independent, Süddeutsche Zeitung, Yahoo News, Lithuanian television station LRT and others. The documents state that associations and organizations should be established that can covertly promote pro-Russian narratives and spread Russian culture. The propagandists allege discrimination against Russian speakers and Russian-speaking students should be invited to Russia. Meanwhile, it is necessary to prevent the destruction or relocation of Soviet-era monuments during World War II. One document states that in Estonia, lucrative business contracts should be offered to entrepreneurs. Working with Estonian businessmen to explain the readiness of the Russian Federation to open the Russian market to them, provided that Tallinn changes its foreign policy to be more pro-Moscow. According to Expressen, a strategy document shows that Russia intends to use the Baltic states' reliance on its electricity grid as leverage by pointing to the risk of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania being disconnected from the grid of Russia. The Baltic states are part of BREL, an electricity network controlled by Moscow. However, countries are preparing to synchronize their systems with mainland Europe as early as 2026. A document on Lithuania states that Russia will create conditions under which the Lithuanian leadership will be forced to recognize the potential damage to its national security from building up a military presence of NATO in the region. The document states that Lithuania should be prevented from receiving NATO-affiliated air defense systems, while the number and scope of NATO combat and combat training operations in the country should be reduced. Darius Jauniskis, the head of Lithuania's security service, told Expressen that Russia often tries to use its military might to pressure other countries. Russia's goal is to convince the international community that it is ready for a military confrontation if its demands are not heeded, Jauniskis said. The Kremlin's plans in Latvia refer to the containment of NATO and the establishment of a school at the Russian educational institution in Riga, which will become a center for strengthening the position of the language, Russian literature and culture, by 2025. It says that by 2030, Russian will have to be considered a state language. Yahoo News notes that both Estonia and Latvia have recently adopted language reforms that will eventually lead to a ban on teaching Russian in kindergartens and schools. In February, Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Agency said it believed Russia could exert significant military pressure on the Baltic states. The security agency assessed that Russia considers it the most vulnerable part of NATO. This will make them the focus of military pressure in the event of a NATO-Russia conflict, the intelligence agency said. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Foreign Ministry by email for comment. 9. Advisor Zelensky blames the US for the big war in Europe. Newsweek ran a report titled Zelensky Advisor Blames US for Unleashing Major War in Europe, which means Advisor Zelensky blames the US for the big war in Europe. The United States has pursued a wrong nuclear policy that has led to war in Europe, said Volodymyr Zelensky, chief advisor to Ukraine's president. Mikhailo Podolyak said the US and other Western countries encouraged Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons when the former Soviet Union collapsed. In return they would offer safeguards. This was misinterpreted by Russia, leading to conflict. When the Cold War ended, Kiev possessed a stockpile of nuclear weapons left over from his time as a member of the Soviet Union. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to hand over all of these nuclear weapons, even though Kiev had undisputed control over the Soviet stockpiles. Washington, Moscow, and Kiev signed what became known as the Tripartite Declaration in 1994, with the Budapest Memorandum of the same year promising security guarantees to Ukraine in exchange for the removal of nuclear weapons from the country. The nuclear rhetoric has played a major role in the ongoing Ukraine war, with the Kremlin hinting at the possibility of using nuclear weapons as Western countries provide aid to Kiev. On Tuesday, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said the possibility of a nuclear war was increasing every day. On Tuesday, according to Ukraine's ambassador to the US, Oksana Markarova, a new bipartisan resolution in the US House of Representatives was introduced to reaffirm the US position that Ukraine should be restored to its borders. Internationally recognized world in 1991 inch. The year 1991 marked the official dissolution of the Soviet Union, and the creation of an independent Ukraine comprising the now annexed territories of Crimea, the Donbass, and the southern regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia. Ms. Markarova said the draft resolution states that the US must work with its allies and partners to ensure Moscow pays reparations for Ukraine, as well as the support of the community. World Council for the Restoration of Ukraine. We must not repeat the mistake of September 1, 1939, Republican Representative Joe Wilson of South Carolina told Yahoo News, referring to the time when the Nazis invaded Poland and marked the beginning of the war. The beginning of World War II in Europe. It takes a lot of courage to publicly acknowledge past mistakes, Podolyak said on Wednesday. The House resolution is clear. Unfortunately, the United States, along with other Western countries, has encouraged Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons and other weapons to ensure security and stability in the region in accordance with the law. Methods of protection. This was a false policy that was misinterpreted by the invaders and led to a great war in Europe. Returning territory invaded by Russia, respecting international law, prosecuting war criminals and admitting Ukraine to NATO is the only way to guarantee security in Europe today, Podolyak said. This position is absolutely clear and has effective bipartisan support. Earlier this month, former President Bill Clinton said he felt self-guilty in the Ukraine war for his role in persuading Kiev to give up nuclear weapons. I feel guilty myself because I got the Ukrainians to agree to give up their nuclear weapons, Clinton told Irish broadcaster RT. None of them believed that Russia would do this if Ukraine still had their weapons, he added, adding that at the time Ukraine was afraid to give up those weapons. Newsweek has reached out to the U.S. Department of Defense and the Office of the President of Ukraine for comment via email.